Yes, so we began a new section in the Sefer Yeshua. We're looking at the Kibush Haaretz, the process of conquering the land. And until now, we had looked at just isolated cities, Yericho and Ai. And then, starting from Perek Yud Aleph, we talked about, or the Sefer talks about two major campaigns of kings. One was the fighting of the southern part of Eretz Yisrael, and that was the famous story of the stopping of the sun. And then we had a northern milchama led by the king of the city of Chatzor, and in both cases it was vanquished. But once again, remember, when we talk about the north, it's not all far north, meaning to say we're going to see that much of the north was not conquered in Yeshua's lifetime. Essentially, we have the south, which includes Yerushalayim through the Negev. And then we have the north, which goes around up to Mei Marom, which is north of Yam Kinneret. That was Chula. North of that was not conquered at the time. So north is only relative, is a relative term to south. It does not mean mamash, the northern boundary. Again, remember that many Shvatim, the land was divided or will be divided. The entire boundary of Eretz Yisrael will be divided among all the Shvatim, but much of that land is not going to be conquered till after Yeshua's death. Now, I want to just read you some psukim from Perek Yud Aleph, which is after the Nitzachon in Chatzor, and it mentions Yamim Rabim Asa Yoshua. This is Perek Yud Aleph Pasuk Yud Ches. Yamim Rabim Asa Yoshua es kol hamalachim ha'ela milchama. It was Yamim Rabim, many days, which actually means years, 7 years. Yoshua pursued all of these enemies. And Pasuk Yud Tes says, this is Perek Yud Aleph Pasuk Yud Tes, Lo haisa ir asher hishlima el b'nei Yisrael. There was not a single city that had made peace with Bnei Yisrael, bilti, except for Chivi Yoshvei Givain, except for the Chivi people who were the inhabitants of Givain. Remember, they were the ones who tried to get a bris by deception. As Hakayel, everything, Lokhu B'milchama, right? So the pasuk here is telling me beferish that not a single city made shalom with Bnei Yisrael except for the Givonim, later called the Nesinim. And then Pasuk Chaf says, Ki me'es Hashem haisa. And this came from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, L'chazek es libam likras ha'milchama es Yisrael. L'chazek es libam, mamish the same phrase as Paro. To harden or strengthen their heart, so they would wage war with Bnei Yisrael. L'man hachrimam, in order that they should be destroyed. Levilti heyais lehem techina, that they should not have any type of mercy or compassion. Laman hashmidam, that they should be utterly eradicated. Kasher tziva Hashem es Moshe, as God commanded Moshe. So these verses could be very easily overlooked as you're just reading the story, but indeed, they are quite astounding and quite amazing. First, let's analyze the pasuk that says, there was not a single city that made shalom with Bnei Yisrael except for the Chivi Yoshvei Givain. So again, a few points. Once again, we have to go over the Machlokes, Rambam, and Rashi. According to Rambam, according to the Rambam in Hilchos Malachim, even after Bnei Yisrael cross the Yarden and begin Milchama, every given city still has the opportunity to make shalom, and if they make shalom, they will be spared. So in the middle of the war, any one of these cities could have made shalom. What is shalom in this situation? So you'll recall, shalom is a reference to accepting the 7 mitzvos, accepting avdus, a state of some type of slavery, subservience, which means Jewish sovereignty, and paying taxes. So according to the Rambam, the option of Kriyas Shalom was ever present, and therefore, what is the pasuk telling me? But no city took advantage of it. They wanted to fight. Now, according to Rashi, you'll recall that it's the Shita of Rashi that once Yehoshua crosses the Yarden, the option of Shalom is off the table, and we are mechuyev to eradicate the 7 nations unless they would flee, based on lo sechaye kol neshama, not keeping anybody alive. So when the pasuk says there was not a single city that made peace except for the Givonim, it must mean, according to Rashi, that there was not a single city that accepted Yehoshua's pre-Yarden offer to make peace, because once they cross the Yarden, there is no option of making peace anyway. Right? So once again, therefore, the reference that there was not a single city that made peace because God hardened their heart, which I'll get to in a minute, according to the Rambam, that would be understood that even during the 7 years of fighting, there was an opportunity of shalom, but nobody took advantage of it. According to Rashi, Rashi's a little more dochek, you'd have to interpret it that not a single city accepted the peace treaty that was offered to them before Yoshua crossed the Yarden. So again, whenever we confront anything about shalom and lo sechaye kol neshama, we always have to bring in the machlokas, Rashi, and the Rambam. Now, the other point is, let's go back to the Rambam for a moment. According to the Rambam, the pasuk is very straightforward. There was not a single city that made peace, even though they could have made peace, except for the Givonim. But let me just point out that even this pasuk doesn't mean that there weren't Yechidim. For example, how does Kriyas Shalom work, right? So according to the Rambam, even when we're in Eretz Yisrael, even when we're fighting, we offer them peace, which once again means Sheva Mitzvos, taxation, and Avdus, some type of servitude or acceptance of Jewish sovereignty. So if a city doesn't accept it, we are mechuyev to eradicate, lo sechaya kol neshama. What about Yechidim in the city, though? In other words, is this decided by a majority vote? What if, 51% want to wage war, but 49% don't want to wage war? Can Kriyas Shalom be done by individuals or minority parts of the population? The mashmos, although it's not beferish, the mashmos of the Rambam and even the Psukim is yes. Yes. And that is why throughout Tanakh, throughout all of Tanakh, or at least Yoshua and Shoftim, you will find chivis here, and you constantly find people like Yechidim from the 7 nations that are hanging around. And the way we would have to explain it is, these were individuals who accepted Shalom. So the statement, there was not a single city that made Shalom except for the Givonim, that refers to a city as a whole, but there were Yechidim who accepted Shalom, and that's why we do find that they were hanging around. In fact, we even find Amalekim who are hanging around, and apparently there was no problem with that. Yeah.
Do the children need to also accept it individually, or is it just like if the grandfather did it?
Well, it depends what you mean by children. I assume that children who are ketanim would simply be covered by the family acceptance.
Let's say like later offspring who weren't alive at the time that. Do they need to?
No, it seems, I don't think shalom is a constant thing, meaning once it's done, they're allowed. And then, if a later generation violates the Noachide law, they could be punished as Noachites who violate the Noachide law, but it wouldn't be an eradication of the 7 nations. Okay, so having that in mind, let's now go on to the next idea, which is very complicated, and that is the Navi, Yoshua, gives us a reason. Why did no community accept Shalom except for the Givonim? After all, logically, they should have accepted Shalom. They see the Jewish people are defeating all of these kings. So it says, God hardened their heart because God wanted them to be destroyed. Meaning to say, logically, there would have been cities, people, that would have accepted Shalom, but Hashem didn't want it. Which means, even when the 7 nations accept Shalom, it is not desirable, bi'etzem, to have them in Eretz Yisrael. They're a bad influence. They're a destructive influence. But kind of nebuch, if they accept shalom, you're stuck with them. So God hardened their hearts, their meaning the 7 nations. God hardened their hearts so they would not want to make shalom. Yeah.
He hardened all their hearts, why didn't that work for the Givonim? If that was what he did, how come the Givonim should accept?
How did the Givonim go under the radar, you mean?
Yeah.
Why did they make shalom? That's a good question. Why Hashem let one example, but maybe that wanted to prove the idea by the fact that one nation made shalom and no other, meaning if no nation made shalom, we would say, the Canaanites are stubborn. But if one nation made shalom and no one else did, that would be evidence of God hardening the heart. So obviously when you read this idea of hardening hearts, you think immediately of the Makos. And this raises the same problem as the Makos, and that is, it is fundamental in Judaism that there is bechira, there is free will, right? This is Or Sameach's favorite topic, probably. Every division we discuss free will, free will, free will. And the Rambam writes in Hilchos Tshuva that without a concept of free will, it's impossible for there to be reward for doing good things, because why should I be rewarded? I'm just conditioned to be good. And it's impossible for there to be a punishment for Averos, because I didn't choose. It's not fair to punish me for something over which I don't have free will. Right? And the Rambam writes, every person can be as righteous as Moshe Rabbeinu, or can be as evil as Yeravam ben Nevat. Now, the concept of Bechira is a very, very complicated concept, simply because realistically, based on a person's circumstances in life, they don't always have unfettered free will. I mean, is Hashem going to talk about the drug addict lying in the gutter? Why weren't you in Lakewood? Why aren't you learning in Kollel? So Rav Dessler modifies the Rambam very significantly. I wouldn't call it a perush on the Rambam. It really is a different insight, in which Rav Dessler develops the idea that is called Nekudas HaBechira, meaning there is a certain fulcrum point, meaning in life, there are many, many decisions that are past us, and there are many, many decisions that are ahead of us. And that is not where we exercise our bechira. By past us, I mean the following. Let's assume that a person has been keeping kosher all of his life, or for 20 years. So initially, when you first decide to keep kosher, you have a struggle. You have a certain struggle. You walk by McDonald's. You walk by whatever it is, bacon and eggs. So you may have a taiva, and you have to make a decision. I'm not going to give in to that taiva. So you're exercising your bechira not to eat treif, and you get rewarded for exercising that bechira. But after a while, or if you were never raised, you've always kept kosher, that decision is behind you, meaning to say it's no longer part of your active struggle. Meaning you walk by a non-kosher restaurant, it doesn't even occur to you to go in. It's just beyond you. So at that point, that's no longer in your bechira vision, because you're past it, or you never had that problem. I mean, you can take a lot of examples. Murder. The Torah says don't murder, so am I going to get rewarded every day that I didn't shoot somebody? Well, it depends. If you're a kind of a psycho who loves to murder people, but you somehow control yourself because you realize it's not a good thing, yeah, you're going to get rewarded for not pulling out your machine gun. Yeah. But the average non-psycho person, God's going to ask you after 120 years, what good thing did you do in your life? He says, I never killed somebody. Well, besides the fact that Hashem might say, well, did you embarrass somebody? There are different ways we kill people, by the way, so we're not even so clear about that one. But literally, there's not a single person I ever gunned down, unless I was a chayal or something. Well, you're not going to get a lot of credit for that, you see, because that's not within the ambit of your struggle. So those are decisions that are behind us. There are other decisions that were not yet on the madrega, to make in a good way, and Hashem does not hold us accountable for that. Right? Hashem is going to ask, why, didn't you learn 20 hours a day? And you're going to say, how could I do that? He says, well, the Vilna Gaon did it. Why couldn't you do it? We're not there yet. So Rav Dessler says, reward and punishment are not computed based on the decisions behind you, or some decisions are ahead of you, although that's more of a vague category. You never really know if I should be there or not. But there is a certain range in the middle where you are actively in a situation where you could go either way. There's a tipping point. You could go to the good, you can go to the bad. And Rav Dessler developed the idea called Nekudas HaBechira, the point of choice. And Rav Dessler says, when God holds you accountable for not making good choices, it is based on where you are in life. So the guy in the gutter, his choice, is not, should I stay in the gutter or should I learn in yeshiva, assuming he's Jewish? His choice is, should I stay to the gutter or go to a treatment center? So the Nekudas HaBechira is that particular decision. And there always is a Nekudas HaBechira. So this is, again, a very, very fascinating idea. It's not so relevant to the text here, but I think Rav Dessler qualifies it, because one of the difficulties in the Rambam is the Rambam seems to posit an on-off switch. Every person at any moment, I could be Moshe Rabbeinu, or I could be Yeravam ben Nevat. Well, come on. After all, I am affected by the cumulative choices of my life. And by the time I reach a certain place, I may not be capable of being on that high madrega. But Rav Dessler's point is, okay, that may be true, but there's always a choice. There's always a choice that you can make. And Hashem says, why didn't you make that choice? Okay, that's Nekudas HaBechira, again, a very, very important yesod in Bechira. But be it as it may, without Bechira, we're back to the Rambam's original argument. How could there be reward? How could there be punishment? Yeah.
How does it work when Hashem knows everything with Bechira?
Yeah, so that's a question the Rambam himself raises. The Rambam raises the question, if Hashem knows the future, then how could there be free will? Meaning the following. You're telling me every morning when I open my eyes, I have Bechira to get out of bed and daven, or stay asleep and miss Kriya Shema. It's up to me. I could go either way. And for most of us, that's actually still a live struggle, right? That's Nekudas HaBechira. But wait a second here. Hashem knew whether I would get up or not. He knew it yesterday. He knew it 1,000 years ago. He knew it 10 million years ago. So how is it shayach that Monday morning I have Bechira when Hashem already knew what I was going to do before I was born, before I was created? Right? He already knew everything that would ever happen. So that's a famous question. Now the Rambam himself asks the question. The Rambam says, how can there be human free will if Hashem knows the future? Yeah.
Where does he ask that?
Where? In Hilchos Tshuva. Right. Yeah, Hilchos Tshuva. So the Rambam gives an answer. What do they say? Only a philosopher's mother would like. The Rambam gives a very, very philosophical, abstract answer. And the answer the Rambam gives is the following. He says, Hashem is a unity, meaning unlike human beings, where we're divisible into parts, right? We have a hand, we have a foot, we have a brain, we have a mouth, right? You could take a human being and you could identify separate parts in them. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we say the words, we don't even know what that means. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Achdus HaPoshut. The unity of Hashem is not divisible. Of course, that creates huge problems. What does it mean when we say our neshamos are a part of God? What do you mean a part of God? You just said there are no parts to God. Oh, okay, we'll leave it. There's a lot that's very difficult here. But Hashem is Achdus HaPashut. Now, if HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a total unity, that means Hashem's knowledge is the same as Hashem's totality, meaning unlike a human being where there's me and there's my knowledge, the idea of Achdus HaPashut means that Hashem's knowledge is the same as Hashem. Therefore, the Rambam says, since it is impossible to understand Hashem, it is definitionally impossible to understand Hashem's knowledge because Hashem's knowledge is the same as Hashem. Therefore, how does Hashem's knowledge exist when there's free will is an impossible question to answer. Essentially, this is a complicated way of saying can't answer it. But he's giving you a reason why you can't answer it. He's predicating the reason why you can't answer it on the notion of unity of God. That since God's knowledge is equal to God's essence because of Achdus HaPashut, then if you don't understand God's essence, you can't understand God's knowledge. Therefore, how do you reconcile free will with advanced knowledge? The Rambam says is an unanswerable question. It is a question that is impossible to answer. Now, the Ravid was quite annoyed at this. You could almost see the Ravid's frustration. The Ravid writes, if he can't answer the question, he shouldn't have bothered to ask it in the first place. The Ravid gives another answer I'll mention. But I want to point out that the way many people answer the question is that the whole question is predicated on a concept of time. In other words, look at the way the question is. How can I have choice on Monday if Hashem already, right? Look at the word, already knew. So by Monday, he already knew. That's presupposing a past, a present, a future. That's called temporal, living in time. And when you live in time, if something is already known yesterday, then there's no choice to be made today. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not live in the world of time. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is above time. Although I'm going to use a time. Therefore, God is living, this is also not an accurate way of saying it, in a continuous present. God sees the future not as something that is going to happen. God sees the future. It's already here. Now, from that perspective, knowledge is not a contradiction to choice. Because, for example, if I see you, let's say a human being, I see you davening Shachris. Now, the fact that I see you davening Shachris, that doesn't affect your free will. I'm just observing your choice. Now, since L'Gabei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the future is a concurrent reality, then Hashem does not know ahead of time what I'm going to choose. Hashem just sees my choice. And therefore, once you live, only Hashem, once HaKadosh Baruch Hu is beyond time, there actually is no question. You see? In other words, the question that God's knowledge takes away choice is only if God knew what I'm doing before I did it. But that's not the way God knows it. God doesn't know it before I did it. God is above time, so God is observing what I'm doing. It's still my choice. Okay, so that's how one of the ways of understanding it. Again, it's obviously we don't know how any of this works. We don't understand how the future works. I mean, the truth is the Ralbag. Okay, I don't want to get any mail on this, but usually I don't get so much mail from this year. I mean, the Ralbag, Rav Levi ben Gershom, who was a very, very controversial philosopher. He was related to the Ramban. Actually makes the point. He has a very simple answer to the question. How can I have free will if God knows the future? He says, God doesn't know the future. He actually says God doesn't know the future because he says the future is not something you can know because it didn't happen yet. Meaning it's not a limitation in Hashem. This is almost the opposite approach. If Hashem sees it as a concurrent reality, the Ralbag says there is no future until it happens. So there is nothing for Hashem to know. Now that's the Ralbag, as you would suspect. Now it's interesting, the Ralbag has an interesting double career. I think I mentioned this before. Ralbag, Rav Levi ben Gershom, actually is one of the most accepted Perushim on Nach. And if you look at any Mikros Gedolos Nach, you'll see besides Rashi and Mitsudos, David, the two leading Perushim are Radak, Rav David Kimchi, these are Rishonim, and Ralbag. So Ralbag is a very, very, very respected and accepted Perush on Nevi'im and Kesuvim. And yet, the Ralbag wrote a book in philosophy called Milchemes Hashem, The Wars of God. Of course, his enemies called it The Wars Against God, and they retreat Milchemes Hashem. And this is one of the most, by far, one of the most controversial books on Jewish philosophy that was ever written. And indeed, he wrote a commentary on the Torah, which is also controversial. It's interesting. In Nach, he kind of kept it out. But in his Milchemes Hashem and in his Perush al Torah, which, by the way, is not printed as often as the Perush on Nach, he's very, 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 very controversial. And one of his big controversies is his assertion that Hashem does not necessarily know the future. Now, as I say, I'm being very superficial there because there are huge machloksim what the Ralbag even means. And there's going to be a lot of discussion about that. But at least if you follow the simple meaning of the Ralbag, it turns out that you don't have a problem to begin with. Yeah?
So outside of time, and when we're on this discussion like free choice, this challenge of like how can someone go against free will? What's the usual response to that? Meaning if Hashem willed someone to do an Avera, Hashem willed us to be here in this room today.
No, so that's what I'm going to get to. That I'm segueing it around to address that particular question, right? So this is the general idea of free will. Now, the Rambam himself then asks, he asks a number of questions, but one of the main questions he asks is, how do we understand Hashem hardening Paro's heart and continuing to bring makos on Paro and on Mitzrayim because they didn't send out the Jewish people? Now, the implication is if Hashem would not have intervened and kind of made them be stubborn, the Egyptians or Paro might have given in earlier. But Hashem wanted to show his power and Hashem wanted to show his might. So Hashem said, essentially, I'm not going to let you let them go. So it took the form of stubbornness. And then we'll send you more makos and more makos and more makos and more makos. And the question becomes, where is the justice? God made them sin. Or at least made Paro sin. If God made them sin, how could they be punished, right? Famous question, and it's in the Rambam, Hilchos Tshuva. By the way, he addresses it in two different places. It's in Hilchos Tshuva, and earlier it's addressed in Shemaina Prakim. That's the Rambam's Hakdama to Pirkei Avos, where the Rambam there too develops the idea of free will and raises the question of Hashem hardened Paro's heart. So here is what the Rambam himself says. The Rambam himself says the following. We know that there is a system of punishment in the Torah for different Averos, and we know that punishment can take many, many forms. There is a punishment that might be death, a punishment that might be illness, punishment that might be loss of function, right? Paralysis, loss of limb. And the Rambam says, by and large, we can't really identify. We don't have the understanding of why a given particular punishment was chosen. Will it be Olam Hazer, Olam Haba, Gehenna? But generally speaking, there is a concept of punishment. So here's what the Rambam says. The same way that a punishment for a sin might be loss of limb, a punishment of a sin might be God will take away your capacity to do tshuva and make the right decision in order that you receive the full punishment for the previous averos that you chose to do. So here's what the Rambam points out. The phrase, Hashem hardens Paro's heart, does not appear in the first 5 makos. The first 5 makos, the Egyptians could have let the Jewish people go. And it says, Paro hardened his own heart. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 opportunities seeing the miracles of Hashem over and over and over again. And the Egyptians made a decision on their own not to listen to God. Their punishment was God took away their capacity to do tshuva, because if they would have done tshuva, they could have gotten out of their fully deserved punishment. In other words, the point the Rambam is making is that Makos 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 were not punishments for their refusal to let the Jews go after Hashem hardened their heart. It was punishment that they deserved for the first 5 Makos, but had they done tshuva, they wouldn't have gotten that full punishment. Hashem took away. Even that, by the way, is not as literal. Took away does not necessarily mean impossible, but Hashem made it harder for them. Meaning, theoretically, there may have been a possibility to even overcome that, but Hashem made it super hard. So, according to the Rambam, you don't get punished for what God makes you do. But God will make you do something sometimes in order to punish you for the averos that you previously did through Bechira. And the Rambam says that is why Hashem hardened Paro's heart only after the first 5, because at that point they deserved all of the onshim that would come. But had they done tshuva, God would have no choice but to forgive them. Hashem took away the darchei tshuva. And the Rambam says that is the worst of all punishments. You know, we say loss of arm, loss of eyesight, those are awful things. But the loss of the capacity of Bechira, that is the most grievous of all, because that takes away, or at least limits, the ability to do tshuva. Yeah.
Can we say that world leaders don't, God takes away the fear of world leaders? There's a similar statement, right?
Yeah, so that's the Rambam does not use that idea per se, but some invoke a pasuk in Mishlei that says, "Leiv malachim v'sarim biyad Hashem," the heart of kings and princes are controlled by God. That God kind of directs the decisions, because unlike an individual where my decisions are about me, a king or a government affect everybody. Therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu kind of controls. That's why people raise the question, according to that, what difference does it make who you vote for? What difference does it make who wins elections? What difference does anything in the political realm make? HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to control the decisions that people make anyway. It's an interesting question. So among some religious people, there is actually a notion of absolute fatalism when it comes to politics, and they say it makes no difference who wins. Most do not go that far. Most say they're still kind of hishtadlus, meaning what Hashem is going to make the leader decide to some degree is affected by how much you worked to get a certain result. So there's going to be an interaction there. So Trump versus Harris, could indeed make a difference, even though Hashem is causing the decisions to be made anyway. So apparently, if you plug in the Rambam, now the Rambam does not bring the pasuk in Yoshu. He does not bring this at all. But apparently, you can take what the Rambam says about Hashem hardening Paro's heart, and you can apply it to this situation as well. And that is, the 7 nations were chayav misa. Because of their avodah zarah, because of their violence, because of their perversity, they deserve to die. Now, most of the time, Hashem leaves open pathways of tshuva, even to the biggest Russia. But there are times that the rishus is so severe that he is maineya from them tshuva, so they will get their full punishment. That's exactly what this pasuk is saying. This pasuk is basically saying Hashem didn't want the 7 nations to have opportunities for tshuva because they had already crossed the no man's land. Now, what degree of rishus is that? I mean, again, that's very rare. That is very rare. Meaning, most of the time, the biggest Russia is given the chance to do tshuva. Most of the time. There are extraordinary instances where Hashem is moneya, the darchei tshuva. But even then, the punishment is not for what you did after you lost your free will. Okay, this is important. You're not being punished for what you did after you lost your free will. You're being punished for what you did before you lost your free will, except you don't have the opportunity to do tshuva to get out of that. You see the nature of the Rambam in that way. And as the Rambam is learning, you don't get punished for what you do after you lose your free will. It just means that you can lose, which is rare, the capacity of tshuva, and then you get punished for what you did before. Now, there is another way of understanding it a little bit, which is people sometimes interpret the Rambam this way, but it's not really the Rambam. It's a separate svara, and they go with the idea that God can even punish it. That when it says God hardens your heart, it's really understood as a kind of consequence of your addiction to evil. Meaning, let's take a very simple case. Let's say, from the secular world, somebody drives while they're intoxicated. They're drunk. And they kill somebody, right? So that's a serious crime. Vehicular homicide while intoxicated. Now, what if the drunk guy simply has a very simple defense? Hey, I was drunk. What do you expect? I wasn't able to control the car. I couldn't drive any better than I drove. I was too intoxicated to know that I shouldn't go into the car. So, how can I be punished for what I did when I was drunk? So the answer is, it's true that when you were drunk, you had no control, no self-control. But since that is a consequence of the voluntary decisions you made, Hashem can hold you liable even for the involuntary actions because they came from the voluntary ones. Now, this is a different understanding. This is not exactly the same as the Rambam. So here's the argument. When a person does Averos, every time we do Averos, we kind of become addicted to sin. We may lose our capacity of choice because it becomes harder and harder. The Gemara says in Moed Katan, a person does an Avera one time, and then a second time, it becomes mutter to him at that point. It's not even a problem. And Rabbi Shlomo Salanter added, and if he does it a third time, it becomes a mitzvah. Right? So a person might say, well, if I'm doing an Avera the 5th, 6th, 7th, millionth time, how could I be responsible? It became mutter to me. The answer is yeah, but it's connected to the volitional choice. So according to this, Paro and the Egyptians could be punished even for their refusal after they became addicted to sin, because that was a consequence. It's a little different than the Rambam. The Rambam was saying you're getting punished for the chizuk leiv averos, and this simply means you didn't do tshuva. According to this, you can even get punished for that. And by the way, this applies to mitzvahs too. I had mentioned before the nekudas habechira, that you're not going to, let's say if you keep kosher, and I walk by a treif restaurant, I'm not making a choice at that point, right? I'm not making a choice because it's not within my struggle. So the question becomes, so that means I'm not going to get rewarded for keeping kosher? So some want to say, if it initially was a struggle for you, and you made it not a struggle, then even what you do when it's not a struggle, you're going to get reward because that is the product of your struggle. Now, that is a teretz for a Baal Tshuva. That's not necessarily a teretz for an FFB. An FFB may never have had the struggle. That's another discussion. But at least the concept is that things that were part of your struggle, and now you've gone beyond them, you may still get rewarded. And in fact, that may be an explanation, perhaps, of why we might get reward from mitzvos even after Mashiach comes. Because one of the famous questions is, gee, when Mashiach comes and we don't have a Yetzer Hara, so when I'm doing mitzvos, there's no struggle. So that l'chayra means, how can I get reward for messianic mitzvos? But the answer is, if you're doing the mitzvos in a state of purity, but it's a result of the struggles you had earlier, Hashem still considers those mitzvos to be part of your struggle as well. I mean, that might be an explanation of reward, limot Mashiach. But be it as it may, it is interesting that although the Rambam does not mention it, the Rambam's hesber of Hashem hardening Paro's heart is going to be very, very relevant lagabe the 7 nations. Hashem did not want them to be in Eretz Yisrael. But Nebuch, Hashem would be stuck, kaviyachol, if they would have done tshuva by Kriyas Shalom. But Hashem doesn't want them there. So Hashem hardened their heart, so the Jewish people kill them off. But as I say, in spite of this, there were Yechidim who in fact accepted. Yeah.
Someone is born during the Mashiach era.
Say again, didn't hear.
Someone is born, like after Mashiach,
Yeah.
they'd be born without a Yetzer Hara.
Yeah, so that's going to be a problem. So again, maybe we'll have to talk about this later. The idea that there's no Yetzer Hara Limosa Mashiach does not automatically have to be understood as a total absence of Yetzer Hara. It means the struggle will be carried at a higher level. And therefore, even one born during Mashiach will have his struggle. And that will be the basis of his heart. Okay, we'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you for listening to this Awesome Ech production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.